The Alaskan bullworm is truly everywhere. Hello, wizards, witches, and everyone in between. My name is Emma, and welcome to my August wrap-up. So I think I had my first ever migraine yesterday, so I'm still not feeling the best today. I might just be getting sick. I don't know, my throat's weird today, but I was in the mood to film, so bear with me if I seem lackluster. I'm in my pajamas and I'm feeling cozy. So I read 20 books in August, which is insane, but a lot of them were mediocre, just like my content. So it'll be an interesting wrap up. All right, the first book I read was The Hazlewood by Melissa Albert, and I gave this 2.5 out of 5 stars. This book is about a girl whose grandmother passes away and her family is like notoriously unlucky. She finds this note from her grandma that says, stay away from the Hazlewood. So what does she do? She goes to the Hazlewood. There's a lot of reviews on Goodreads saying that the first half is better than the second. The plot is better than the execution. I agree with all of that. I didn't hate it. I mean, I gave it a 2. A 2's like, some elements I liked, some I didn't. I didn't really enjoy the process of reading it. That's kind of what a 2 is for me. Like, wouldn't reread it. So I really liked the plot, but the second half just got weird. I really liked the character of Ellery Finch. He was interesting, but the second half felt like a really bad Alice in Wonderland fever dream. I had no idea what was happening. It was just so weird. And I definitely think my favorite part of this book was the stories in it that were like the book that the main character's grandma had supposedly written and was famous for, was these like creepy fairy tale stories. And there's a couple in the book, but then at least this edition came with some at the end. There's like a little thing at the end that has, I don't know, 3 or 4, and that was definitely the highlight. So I think I would love to pick up a book from this author that's like a collection of creepy fairy tales, but in terms of like the novel itself, I didn't feel it, especially towards the end. Next, I read Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys, and I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of my favorites of the month and of the year. It was so good. It is historical fiction, young adult historical fiction about this ship that sinks during World War II. And I don't think I'd heard about it before, but it had like 5,000 casualties. Like, it was way more catastrophic than Titanic. And the majority of the people on the boat who had died were children. Like, absolutely devastating, right? You never hear about it. So it was really interesting. I am a sucker for World War II historical fiction, and this came at it in a different way, you know, by describing an event that I had never really heard about. Very interesting. The writing was so good, and it's from 4 different perspectives, I believe, and each person is like very unique, like where they came from. Like someone, like one's a Nazi, one's a girl from Poland, one's a woman from Lithuania. Like, it gives you such a unique perspective on World War II. And I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 and not 5 just because the perspectives did shift quite a lot. And sometimes you'd get like 3 sentences from someone and then it'd shift to a new perspective. And so at times that was kind of frustrating because you didn't have a chance to like get into that character's narrative. But overall, like, it was so good, you guys. I highly, highly recommend that. Next, I'm just gonna clump these all together because they all go together. I read the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. Shadow and Bone, I gave 3.5 stars. Siege and Storm, I gave 2 stars. And Ruin and Rising, I gave 2.5 stars. So, Shadow and Bone. This trilogy's hyped, right? Six of Crows is hyped, like Leigh Bardugo in general is hyped. Never read anything by Leigh Bardugo until this month. and 3.5, like, it was good. Would I have enjoyed it more if I had read it when it came out? Yes. It hasn't aged the best. You can definitely tell it was written like almost 10 years ago. It just has that really like cliche YA fantasy trilogy feel to it. But for this book, that wasn't that bad. I am excited for the Six of Crows duology and King of Scars because what I loved so much about this book and the series in general was the world. The whole Grisha universe and the Russian-esque kind of feel of it. It was very, very interesting and intriguing to me, very atmospheric. And I was very unsurprised that the first book was my favorite because this definitely has an origin story feel to it, and I love a good origin story. Yeah, it was fast-paced. I read this so fast. I flew through it. The Darkling, I didn't understand that. Still don't, so don't murder me in the comments, thanks, but The Darkling's awful. Siege and Storm, 2 stars, like I said. Middle book syndrome. Struggle, let me tell you, it was a struggle to get through this. I really did not like the emphasis placed on the slaughter of mythical creatures. Like, I get it, and I get that they're mythical creatures and that this is fiction, but as an animal lover, that really bugged me. What even happened in this book? This felt like a complete filler to get to the third book. So then the third book, 2.5, I enjoyed it slightly more than Siege and Storm. I think Nikolai definitely carried this third book and gave it that extra 0.5. It was just, it felt so slow and I kind of didn't really care anymore, but I was in love with the epilogue, which is very rare. I feel like YA trilogies that have an epilogue, I usually wish that they weren't, like it wasn't there. But this epilogue was so satisfying and like I really liked the way that it ended. Like in general, this series, I really liked the way it ended. So yeah, I'm glad I read that series. Would I read it again? No, I might read Shadow and Bone again. But now I can move on to Six of Crows, so. Also, wanted to point out, I know I've said before how A Court of Thorns and Roses had the Alaskan bullworm. Let me just read you the first sentence of Ruin and Rising. The monster's name was Izumrud, the Great Worm, and there were those who claimed he had made the tunnels that ran beneath Ravka. Sick with appetite, he ate up silt and gravel, burrowing deeper and deeper into the earth, searching for something to satisfy his hunger until he'd gone too far and lost himself in the dark. The Alaskan bullworm is truly everywhere. Also, I am become a blade. That's all I'm gonna say. All right, next I read Spectacle Volume 2 and I gave this 3 stars. I think I'm just very ambivalent towards the characters, I think is what the problem is. I enjoyed it, but I'm really glad I don't own it. And I'd probably read the next installment, but it just, I don't know. It's just kind of there. It takes place like in a circus, and this girl's twin dies in the beginning of volume 1. And so the series is about like her and then her sister's ghost are trying to help track down who murdered her sister, which sounds a lot cooler, I feel like, than it kind of is. Then I read A Good Marriage by Stephen King, and I gave this 3 stars. It is very short. I listened to it basically in one day, and it's about this lady whose husband has been away on a trip, and she, for some reason, ends up like in her garage and ends up dislodging this weird box and finds a library card, a blood donor card, and maybe a driver's license of this woman whose name she recognizes. And she goes upstairs, types in the woman's name, and the woman was murdered like within their town a couple years ago. And so she starts thinking that her husband is this killer, and like he's away, so she's trying to put the pieces together before he comes home, and then he comes home. Don't want to spoil it for you, but that's basically the plot. It was very thrilling, a very like quick paced read, but I do think that the the first half was more interesting than the second half. But overall, like, if you're going on a road trip or something, I recommend that. Okay, next I finished listening to It by Stephen King. What a long book that was. And I gave it 2.5 stars. I'm just gonna read you my Goodreads review because I think that really, like, I had written it right when I finished reading it, so. I definitely think the movie is better in the sense that it is a summary of the best parts of this book. This book has no reason to be this long. There is so much detail and so much description that is completely unnecessary. Everyone always mentions the orgy scene, so I'm not even going to get into that, but just the way Beverly, as an 11-year-old, was described was very sexual. Sexual metaphors were used to describe things like how her body moved in completely unsexual situations, which is very unnecessary. Despite all this, the 2.5 stars came from the basic plot of the thing called It that has come back to Derry every so often and killed people. It preys on people's fears, and I liked that a lot. I liked all the interactions the characters had with It, but all the side plots and the hundreds of pages of minute details detracted from my enjoyment of the basic plot. And the fact that the book alternates timelines between the characters as kids and then the characters as adults kind of spoils the, like, what the kids end up doing, because you know that they made it to adulthood, and in the adult chapters they're like talking about their experience as kids fighting it, but then the kids' storyline hasn't gotten to where they fight it yet, so it became very anticlimactic when it came time for, like, the kids to fight him. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm glad I read it, but it definitely was not my favorite Stephen King. Alright, next I read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and I gave this 3 stars. This is about a girl named Isabel who is hired to paint portraits of people, and she has, like, this ability to, like, really capture people's emotions in her painting. The Autumn Prince named Rook hires her to paint a portrait of him, and she paints, like, a mortal emotion in his eyes, which gets her in trouble. So that's kind of the basic, like, the intro plot. It was enjoyable. It was very fluffy, not much substance to it, which wasn't a bad thing, but I don't know. I just didn't end up being very invested in any of the characters, but I love that it was a fantasy standalone. It was a fun fantasy read. So if you're looking for something, like, really not complex and just very atmospheric and lighthearted, I would definitely recommend it. But it was really good for that, but I think I was just expecting more of, like, a complex plotline. Then I read The Mermaid's Voice Returns in this one by Amanda Lovelace, and I gave that 3 stars. It was still enjoyable, but I didn't resonate with the poems as much as I did with the Witches Don't Burn in this one. Then I finished listening to Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. My husband and I listened to this on several road trips, so the reading of my book is probably impacted by the fact that I did listen to it in such a, like, expanded length of time with gaps in between, but it really is, like, a good road trip thing to listen to. But I gave it 3 stars. It was entertaining. Neil Gaiman narrates it, and he is such a good narrator, and his writing's good, of course, but I mean, the book truly is just a collection of Norse mythology. We all knew that. It was what I expected it to be. Let's just say that. Like, you know, there's no big narrative plot line or anything, but if you are interested in Norse mythology, I would recommend it. I didn't know anything about Norse mythology except what I learned from Marvel films. Next, I read The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren, and I gave this 3 stars. This was a very, very hyped book on BookTube as well, and I've never read anything by Christina Lauren. Adult contemporary really isn't my thing. It isn't the genre that I go to pick up a lot, but I did enjoy this book despite that. I really liked that it was set in Hawaii because I've been to Hawaii and I don't know, it just made me want to go back. and I liked the sibling dynamics. Like, there's a lot more going on in the book than just the romance, which was good for me as someone who's not a big fan of romance. It was just incredibly predictable. The way that it ended, even just things that happened like interspersed throughout the book, I just saw coming before they happened. So it just really wasn't like anything amazing to me, but I mean, it was a fun, fluffy summer contemporary, which is what it's there for. Next, I read Sleepless, Volume 1 by Sarah Vaughan, which I gave 4 stars. A diverse and complex and intriguing graphic novel. I have the second one from the library right now. I have not read it yet, but I'm very excited, but I'm also sad because there is only 2 in the series. Sleepless, I gave it a 4 because I think I wanted more of it explained, and I wanted more world building, which it doesn't have time for because it is a graphic novel. I just really wish this was a book, to be honest. There's so many cool concepts that I just want fleshed out, but it was great. It's very hard to explain what it's about, but title-wise, Sleepless is referring to the guy in this book who is hired to protect a princess, and he is a sleepless knight. So he took this vow and he does not sleep so that he can guard her 24/7. The lack of sleep like takes a toll on him, and eventually like the sleepless nights die younger because the time that they don't spend sleeping or should spend sleeping are taken off their lifespan, if that makes sense. It's very complex, but it was so good. Definitely, I think, my favorite graphic novel series that I've read. Then I read The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. 5 stars. It was so cute. It's kind of hard to explain what this is about too, but just know that like if you want a really quick read that's like the cutest thing you've ever seen in your life, read The Tea Dragon Society. There's tea dragons. People learn how to take care of them, and it's too pure for this world, honestly. Next, I read A Sorcery of Thorns, also by Margaret Rogerson. I gave this 2.5, which is significantly lower than what I think anyone else I know has rated it. This book was our August book club pick for the Page Dwellers book club, and I liked Enchantment of Ravens more, for sure. This one was way too long, and I didn't really connect with all the characters. The main character, Elizabeth, at the beginning, I loved her. This book started off very strong. I was like, she loves books, she's freaking tall, love that, like, tall representation. Your girl's 5'9". It was so cool. I absolutely loved that. But then as the book progressed, I realized that that's all that she has going for her. We don't know anything about the characters at all. It's like Elizabeth, tall, likes books. That's it. And everything that happens to her. She's so passive. It's just frustrating. The evil, like the villain wasn't really that evil, and I really like the vibes of it, but the execution just was not that strong for me. So this month I also read Paper Girls Volume 3 and 4, and I gave them both 3 stars. I do think the first and second volume, especially the second, were my favorite. 3 and 4, it's just getting more and more complex without really answering any of the questions that were brought up in the first volume. So that's kind of like getting annoying to have to wait for these answers that aren't coming, and then new questions just keep popping up. I'm still enjoying it for sure, but I do think these volumes weren't as enjoyable for me as the first 2 were. Next, I read Dolores Claiborne by Stephen King, and I gave this 4 stars. This was such an enjoyable audiobook. Not only did the main narrator have such just an annoying, but in a good way because it fits the character, but like an annoying old lady accent, just your stereotypical like annoying old lady, but they had background sound effects, which was really, really cool. And this book is about this lady, Dolores Claiborne, who is talking to the police about these 2 murders. And that's all I'm going to say. That's more than I honestly went into this book blind. I just remembered I have this. I can actually show you. There's no chapters in this book. So, and just the fact that it's a lady telling her story the entire time, like no chapters, no nothing. I honestly think it's better in audiobook format for sure. But yeah, there were background noises, like the lady was like, would stop her story and say, oh sure, I'll take some water. And then like you heard water being poured into a glass and you heard the glass like slide towards her. It was really cool. I want you guys to read this, but I do want to kind of preface it by saying if you can, do the audiobook instead, because I really think this book would not be as enjoyable just physically reading it. Good times. I mean, people say that that's like his book that has the most complex female character. Just a lot of the criticisms, which are true. His female characters just kind of there, you know? And Dolores Claiborne, man, she's a boss-ass bitch. Then I listened to The Mist in one day. This is also a very short Stephen King book. So this is about this family who has a house by a lake, and it's summertime, and all of a sudden they just have this really weird storm, and this mist rolls in and does not leave. There's weird things in the mist. The husband and the son go out to try and find, like, get help and stuff, and they meet up with some other people who are like also hiding out. So it kind of has like a Station 11, if you've read that, or War of the Worlds. It kind of has that kind of a vibe. It's very kind of survivally sci-fi. There's like weird creatures in the mist too that are killing people, and they're trying to figure out like how to get rid of the mist, where it came from, that kind of stuff. So that's what it's about. I gave it 3 stars. I think the first half was way stronger than the second half, and it kind of just, I wasn't a fan of the ending. It was kind of open-ended, and not, like, that can sometimes work, but for me, it just didn't for this one. I'm trying to get to a bunch of Stephen King's that I've been meaning to get to forever, so in case you haven't noticed, there's quite a few, and there'll be quite a few in my next month's wrap-up as well. Then the last thing I read was You by Caroline Kepnes, and I gave this 2.5 stars. I listened to this as well. So the plot line, if you guys don't know, it was made into a Netflix show, which I'm kind of intrigued to watch, but it's about this guy who is a stalker, and the book is in second person, which is part of the reason why I was intrigued to pick it up, even though I hadn't really heard great things. But it's just, I mean, not many things are written in second person, so that was intriguing to me. And it's just like a stalker thriller book, but from the perspective of the stalker. So it's like, I watch you go to your car and you open the door and I wonder what you're thinking about. Are you thinking about me? And so that's the way that it's set up, which is really cool for a while, but it kind of gets old. And it is hard because the character, I mean, he's a stalker. He's inherently extremely, extremely unlikable. And so after a while, like, you just kind of get tired of hearing what he has to say. But, and the other interesting thing is, like, any action sequences that happen, there's no, you don't really get a sense of what's happening or any sort of buildup because it's from his perspective. And so they just kind of happen and they have no real impact. That's what's weird about second person. So that was kind of odd. And like I said, he's very unlikable, which makes sense. He's very graphic, sexualizes the girl in this so much. So, you know, if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, I wouldn't recommend this. But I'm glad I read it. It was definitely different, a unique way to tell that story. All right, this was probably very long, but I hope you enjoyed. Those are the books I read in August. Definitely had some weird ones there, but I read a good variety, which I'm happy about. Let me know if you've read any of these. I would highly recommend Salt to the Sea and Dolores Claiborne, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!